There I am, everybody. Good morning. I'm John OLoughlin. Welcome to McDuff Lives. Apologize for starting a couple of minutes late today. So you know how it is. Sometimes things just get a little complicated. But glad to have you with me, and thanks for joining me. If you're watching a replay, also happy to have you. And, we are on both of the YouTube channels this morning. I just want to remind everybody that I'm really uh, um, skittish about broadcasting on YouTube unless I know it's something that doesn't contain any likely strikes. I got another strike last week, and I just don't want to deal with it. I really, really don't. So please follow the Rumble channel for all of my content. If you prefer to watch it later, I'll follow my BitChute channel. It's called McDuff Uncensored, and it is uncensored. Everything I've done in the past 3.5 years is right there on the BitChute channel. There are also some playlists that you can use to go through whole books and all of my different series that I put together. So that's an archive for you. I also have McDuff Archive on Rumble, where our good friends at Content Safe, Matthew Raymer, have populated that with just about every video we could find that was not a book reading. Uh, anyway, there's 3 channels now on Rumble, but the main broadcast channel is McDuff Lives, all one word. And so please sign up there. Just push the follow button, and you will get notices of all of our shows. And now back to FDR. If you've been following along, I've been reading from an article by the Mises Institute. It was actually written back in 2001, but supplemented a little bit, updated for July of this year. And it's very, very cogent and put together as a counterweight to all of the high school history that we get, glorifying FDR. I'm not saying either picture of him is right or that we should run to one side or the other side of the ship of history just based on what I'm reading here. But I think that they make very fair points, and so I'm going to continue now. And I think we will be finishing the article today. So let me bring it up on the screen. And good morning, Rick and Laura. Thanks for joining us and signing in. All right. Now, Rexford Tugwell is one of the most interesting characters that we've covered here in the Screaming Ospreys universe. Maybe 5 years ago, that we were really doing deep dives into Rexford Tugwell. And here's a paragraph or two on him from this essay at the Mises Institute, and that's where we start today. Rexford Tugwell and Making America Over. The most prominent of the brain trusters and the man often considered the chief ideologist of the first New Deal, that is roughly 1933 to 34, was Rexford Guy Tugwell. Tugwell was a follower of the school of thought known as institutional economics, founded by the eccentric writer on economics Thorstein Veblen. His official position was Assistant Secretary of Agriculture, that is, second in command to Henry A. Wallace, but his influence and empire building extended far beyond that. In more ways than one, Tugwell is reminiscent of Ellsworth Toohey in Ayn Rand's great novel, The Fountainhead. Tugwell was another of the progressive thinkers enamored of the experiment in war socialism under Wilson, especially of Bernard Baruch's War Industries Board. The First World War, Tugwell gushed, was an industrial engineer's utopia. He lamented the armistice, which prevented the WIB from expanding into a great experiment in control of production and consumption. And yeah, I'm just going to stop because this is where, when we were studying the Robert Swan Mueller family from RSM1 to RSM2 to RSM3, and the connection to the War Industry Board there in World War One is just very, very important. And the connections that all of this stuff is both horizontally to other things going on at the time, but also timeline ways to connect right to the present day and Robert Swan Mueller witch hunts and whatever is motivating that. Of course, man, it could be a new world with Donald Trump's inauguration in January, and I'm looking forward to seeing that new world. Well, you see, what they were talking about was just turning the whole country into a corporate entity controlled by central authorities. And that, to me, is fascism. While still an academe, Tugwell was eager to observe a land where such a great experiment was well underway. In 1927, he traveled to the Soviet Union. Certain aspects of the dictatorial political system he found offensive, of course, but the mighty changes in society and the economy dazzled him. Through scientific economic planning, the Soviets were able to, quote, carry out their industrial operations with a completely thought out program, unquote. The future, he announced, is, quote, becoming visible in Russia, unquote. Wow, 1927. And then who was the author of the Russian economic revival anyway? Uh, we've studied it here on McDuff Lives with our good friend David Cranmer Underdown, who is a terrific source, and he just puts together so many important threads of history and family lines, corporate connections. Terrific source, David Cranmer Underdown. You can see him on X. See if I can make this bigger. Yes, I can. Sorry. I think I'm going the wrong way. Nope. Okay, I'm going to have to zoom back out and find it on my own. I lost my place. I don't know why I'm having a hard time finding it. Apologize. All right, I'm just going to leave it small so that I don't lose my place again. Talk amongst yourselves. Okay, well, here we go. As the Depression set in, terms like planned economy and national planning became the watchwords of the day. They had been bruited about by advanced thinkers for years and popularized by best-selling writers like George Soule and Stuart Chase, who lauded the Soviet Gosplan, central planning, asking plaintively, quote, "Why should the Russians have all the fun of remaking a world?" Unquote. The flagship of progressivism, the New Republic, made the cant phrases its constant refrain. Prince's, just as a matter of curiosity, when was the New Republic ever right about anything? Now, with FDR in charge, fervent apostles of the nebulous creed wielded real power in Washington. Tugwell could not have been as effective as he was if he'd been merely a dry as dust economist. Instead, he was a true believer, filled with a messianic sense of mission. This he once expressed in a poem he composed as a young man entitled The Dreamer. I am strong. I am big and well made. I am sick of a nation's stenches. I am sick of propertied czars. I have dreamed my great dream of their passing. I have gathered my tools and my charts. My plans are finished and practical. I shall roll up my sleeves and make America over. America, with its tens of millions of people, had to be made over because its market economy was thoroughly obsolete, headed for the scrap heap of history. Quote, the traditional incentives, hope of money making and fear of money loss will be weakened, and a kind of civil service loyalty and fervor will need to grow gradually into acceptance. Tugwell. Echoing socialist critics from the early 19th century on, Tugwell scorns the free market as anarchical, an uncoordinated muddle of hopelessly conflicting aims and purposes. It would have to be replaced by national planning or technocracy, another shibboleth of the day, implying rule by the technical experts like himself. In the future, for instance, quote, new industries will not just happen as the automobile industry did. They will have to be foreseen, to be argued for before they can be entered upon. So, innovation by bureaucratic committee, bringing to mind another work by Ayn Rand, Anthem. The constitutional structure of America was as archaic as the economic, according to Tugwell. It would have to be radically overhauled, and, quote, many a sacred precedent, unquote, would have to go, he declared, adding ominously that this enthralled, quote, calling on an enlarged and nationalized police power for enforcement, unquote. Here, we're getting into Atlas Shrugged territory. All right, so this is FDR's brain trust, the leading guy in the brain trust, the first brain trust, 33 to 34. And what are they doing? They're making technocracy great again. Bertrand Russell would be applauding, standing on his feet. These are the enemies of humanity. Well, at least these are some of the enemies of humanity. How can they just assume this high and mighty thought of themselves? I guess because they have money and they have great educations, those Ivy Leagues and all of the British institutions that they also frequent. Yeah. Nice to be part of the elites. And isn't it also like Animal Farm? Like, some animals are more equal than others. Communism and the New Deal. Nowadays, anyone who alludes to the manifold impact of communism on 20th century America must face the dread accusation of McCarthyism. This has become a term of abuse in the political lexicon, rivaled only by fascism and Nazism. It well serves the left liberal agenda, which demands that much of what really happened in history be relegated to an Orwellian memory hole. But it is impossible to understand the New Deal and later on FDR's wartime relationship with Joseph Stalin unless we engage in what might be called a bit of scholarly McCarthyism. Was FDR a communist? Of course not, and neither were his big business cronies such as Bernard Baruch and Jesse Jones, head of the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, who dispensed government billions to some of the largest corporations in the country. And although, as we shall later see, Franklin's administration came to be riddled with communists, fellow travelers, and Soviet agents of influence, it would be ridiculous to think of any of the members of his cabinet as Reds. Moreover, FDR and his followers were disdainful of the small and noisy Communist Party of the United States. For one thing, in the early 30s, the CPUSA bitterly assailed Roosevelt and all his doings. The time of the United or Popular Front of Red collaboration with all the progressive forces against the right lay a few years in the future. Still, even the apologist Schlesinger had to concede that some New Dealers felt a bond of sympathy, vague but real, with communism. The communists, after all, were underdogs. They were supposedly working for the common man, and the greedy business leader, communist and New Dealers shared an enemy. What Schlesinger neglected to mention is the potent continuing attraction that the model of the Soviet Union exerted on the minds of New Dealers in and out of government. Pardon me a second. Among Tugwell's mentors was the icon of progressivism, John Dewey, famed educator, social philosopher, and insufferable windbag. In 1928, in a series of articles in the New Republic, Dewey praised the new Soviet regime to the skies. It represented, quote, the release of courage, energy, and confidence in life, unquote. The, quote, liberation of a people to consciousness of themselves as a determining power in the shaping of their ultimate fate, unquote. Quote, a release of human powers on such an unprecedented scale that it is of incalculable significance, not only for that country, but for the world, unquote. Dewey confessed that words simply failed him in expressing his unbounded admiration for Soviet education and its democratization of the arts. In Soviet Russia, they were attempting, quote, scientific regulation of social growth, unquote. I never really, I never really saw it so clearly as I do reading that paragraph, that the whole idea of controlling social growth through technology and through reshaping the Constitution or the law is consistent with the communist solution and is also consistent with the New Deal solution. And Tugwell just makes it obvious. You can't avoid it when you read these quotes. And then, of course, I never really knew these John Dewey quotes either. I just knew about the Dewey decimal system as we had to learn it back in the day. Harry Hopkins, who would soon become Franklin's closest advisor, also fell under the spell of fervent admirers of the Soviet Union. John A. Kingsbury, one of the country's leaders in the field of social work, was a kind of father figure to Hopkins. He provided Hopkins with his first job as a social worker, and their intimate friendship continued. Years later, Hopkins made Kingsbury his assistant at the Works Progress Administration, the WPA, which he headed. Kingsbury was another progressive, dazzled by what he saw in Soviet Russia in 1932, and became an apostle in spreading the good news. Even Hopkins's personal psychiatrist, Frankwood E. Williams, whom he began seeing at the time of his troubles in his first marriage, was a devotee of the new order he observed in Russia. A 1932 voyage convinced Williams, a nationally prominent psychiatrist, editor of the Journal of Mental Hygiene, that the communists were shaping a society that was free of the mental illness caused by, quote, the atmospheres of competition and rivalry that vitiate everything from the start and at every step, unquote, in America. Inspiringly, the shrink was for once in his life overcome by a religious experience. It happened while he was packed into a Moscow streetcar when he felt that, quote, for a moment we are just one body, unquote, he and the commuting Muscovites, as he later explains. The real Russia. There are only a small sample of these are only a small sample of the innumerable cheerleaders for Soviet Russia during those years in the government and among the opinion molders throughout American culture. Yet it was not hard to discover the truth about Russia for anyone who discounted the incessant propaganda and ventured beyond carefully arranged tours where secret police agents served as the guides. Lenin had erected the first totalitarian state, and his repressive policies were intensified by Stalin. By 1932, the standard of living of average Soviet workers was lower than that of the unemployed in Western countries. Tens of thousands had been shot as dissenters and as, quote, speculators, i.e., for engaging in trade. The Gulag was rapidly filling up with millions condemned to hunger and death. And then came the Great Terror Famine of 1932 to 33. In this, the forgotten Holocaust, some 5 or 6 millions died of starvation and diseases of malnutrition, mostly in Ukraine, but also in the North Caucasus and other regions. From the villages stretching across this vast area, Red functionaries nervously informed Moscow that conditions were so bad that cannibalism was becoming common. The correspondent of the New York Times, Walter Duranty, staunchly denied in print that any famine existed, although he admitted it in private. For his reporting from Russia, Duranty won a Pulitzer Prize, on which the Times preens itself to this day. But news of the horrors began surfacing around the world, and in the New York Herald Tribune and the Chicago Daily News and elsewhere. Malcolm Muggeridge exposed them in the British press. On the basis of accounts in the Paris press, the American ambassador to France informed the State Department that the Soviet Union was, quote, in the throes of a cruel, unprecedented, unbearable famine. Pardon me. Congressman Hamilton Fish Jr. of New York, later, because of his non-interventionist stance, one of Franklin's pet peeves, introduced a resolution in the House taking cognizance of the bloody ordeal of millions of peasants in Russia, but it was buried in committee. This is the background of FDR's decision to break with the line laid down by 4 presidents from 1917 on and to grant official recognition to the communist regime as the legitimate government of Russia. Part 12, Recognizing the USSR, the Affinity for Dictatorship. the CCC. In granting official diplomatic recognition to the Soviet Union November 1933, Franklin Roosevelt was, quote, unintentionally, of course, returning to the traditions of American foreign policy. From the early days of the Republic throughout the 19th century and into the 20th, in the days, that is, of the doctrine of neutrality and non-intervention, the U.S. government did not concern itself with the morality or often rank immorality of foreign states. That a regime was in effective control of a country was sufficient grounds for acknowledging it to be, in fact, the government of that country. Woodrow Wilson broke with this tradition in 1913 when he refused to recognize the Mexican government of Victoriano Huerta, and again a few years later in the case of Costa Rica. Now, quote, moral standards, unquote, as understood in Washington, D.C., the new self-anointed Vatican of international morality would determine which foreign governments the United States deigned to have dealings with and which not. When the Bolsheviks seized power in Russia, Wilson applied his self-concocted criterion and refused recognition. Henry L. Stimson, Hoover's Secretary of State, applied the same doctrine when the Japanese occupied Manchuria in northern China and established a subservient regime in what they called Manchukuo. It was a method of signaling disapproval of Japanese expansionism, though there was no doubt that the Japanese soon came into effective control of the area, which had been more or less under the sway of competing warlords before. In later years, Roosevelt would adopt the Stimson doctrine of non-recognition and even make Stimson his Secretary of War. But in 1933, all moral criteria were thrown overboard. The United States, the last holdout among the major powers, gave in, and Roosevelt began negotiations to welcome the model killer state of the century into the community of nations. Recognizing Soviet Russia. To the Soviet negotiator, Foreign Minister Maxim Litvinov, FDR presented his two chief concerns. One had to do with the activities of the Comintern. This worldwide organization is often ignored or slighted in accounts of the interwar years, but the fact is that the history of this period from 1918 to the Second World War cannot be understood without a knowledge of its purpose and methods. With his seizure of power in Russia, Lenin turned immediately to his real goal, world revolution. He invited members of all the old socialist parties to join a new grouping, the Communist International, or Comintern. Many did, and new parties were formed: the Communist Party of France, the Communist Party of China, the Communist Party of the United States, and so on, all under the control of the mother party in Moscow, the CPSU. The openly proclaimed aim of the Comintern was the overthrow of all capitalist governments and the establishment of a universal state under red auspices. Hypocrisy was not one of Lenin's many vices. The founding documents of the Comintern explicitly declared that the member parties and movements were to use whatever means, legal or illegal, peaceful or violent, might be appropriate to their situations at any given time. This was the stark specter facing the non-communist nations in the decades before World War II. A power covering 1/6 of the Earth's surface had at its command a global movement that was fighting to wrest control of organized labor everywhere, fomenting revolutions in the colonial regions, vying for the allegiance of the Western intelligentsia, and planting spies wherever it could, all with the goal of bringing the blessings of Bolshevism to all the world's peoples. The first commitment FDR asked of Litvinov was that the Comintern should cease subversion and agitation within the United States. This the Soviet minister readily agreed to. When less than 2 years later, Washington complained that Russia was not living up to its agreement, Litvinov, in true Leninist fashion, denied that any such pledge had been given. Sounds a lot more like James A. Baker to me. The second major point brought up in the negotiations involved freedom of religion in Soviet Russia. Even ever the politician, Roosevelt was worried about Catholic hostility to the Red regime, a hostility based on the murder of thousands of priests, the wholesale destruction of churches, and the ongoing crusade to stamp out all religious faith. In discussing the issue with Litvinov, FDR caused the foreign minister acute embarrassment. He brought up Litvinov's parents, who, Franklin supposed, had been pious, observant Jews. They must have taught little Maxime to say his Hebrew prayers, the president averred, and deep down Litvinov could not be the atheist he, as a good communist, claimed to be. Religion was very important to the American people, and many would oppose recognition unless the regime ceased its persecutions. Quote, "That's all I ask, Max, to have Russia recognize freedom of religion," unquote. It was Franklin at his most fatuous. In the end, Roosevelt got Litvinov to concede that Americans in the Soviet Union would have religious freedom, which was never in doubt anyway, and palmed this off as a major communist concession. FDR had won the public relations contest once again. When Ukrainian Americans tried to hold protest rallies in New York and Chicago, they were broken up by communist goons. Roosevelt's strange bias toward the Stalinist regime continued to the end of his life. The massive documentation accumulating in the hands of the State Department on the real events in Russia was never made public, although it could have affected the great debate going on in the United States and throughout the world on the relative merits of communism and capitalism. Nor did FDR's State Department ever issue any complaints on Soviet crimes. Not on the terror famine, not on the Gulag, not on the purge trials, not on the never-ending executions, including the Katyn massacre of Polish POWs. Yet before the United States entered the war, Secretary of State Cordell Hull frequently called the German envoy on the carpet for Nazi persecution of the Jews. The grotesque double standard in judging communist and Nazi atrocities which Joseph Subran keeps pointing out and which continues to this day, originating with the administration of Franklin Roosevelt. The collectivist wave. There was a peculiar affinity between Roosevelt's New Deal and the European dictatorships that on occasion extended even to fascism and National Socialism, parentheses, the correct term, incidentally, for which Nazism is a nickname, unquote. Close parentheses. Early on, FDR referred to Benito Mussolini as the admirable Italian gentleman, stating to his ambassador in Rome, quote, "I am much interested and deeply impressed by what he has accomplished." Though Franklin's praise of the founder of fascism stopped far short of Winston Churchill's gushing admiration of Il Duce at this time. Mussolini, in turn, was flattered by what he saw as the New Deal's aping of his new corporate state in the NRA and other early measures. When Roosevelt, quote, torpedoed the London Economic Conference of June 1933, Reichsbank President Jan Marschalk smugly told the official Nazi newspaper Völkischer Beobachter that the American leader had adopted the economic philosophy of Hitler and Mussolini. Even Hitler had kind words at first for Roosevelt's dynamic leadership, stating that, quote, "I have sympathy with President Roosevelt because he marches straight to his objective over Congress, over lobbies, over stubborn bureaucracies," unquote. Well, we're going to see some marching over bureaucracies after January 20th, are we not? Very interesting. What linked the New Deal to the regimes in Italy and Germany, as well as in Soviet Russia, was their fellowship in the wave of collectivism that was sweeping the world. In an essay published in 1933, John Maynard Keynes observed this trend and expressed his sympathy with the, quote, variety of political economic experiments, unquote, underway in the continental dictatorships as well as in the United States. All of them, he gloated, were turning their backs on the old, discredited laissez-faire and embracing national planning in one form or another. See how the idea of Keynesian economics is tied to national planning and is also not going to respect the actual values of laissez-faire economics, where you would, for instance, have a gold standard. So the people that are on the gold standard side are not Keynesians. They are more of the Mises Institute libertarian side, or the Austrian school of Hayek. What linked the, oh, I read that. It goes without saying that the New Deal was a much milder form of the collectivist plague. Parentheses, Italian fascism, too, never remotely matched the brutality and oppression of Nazi Germany and Communist Russia. Close parentheses. It is a matter of family resemblances. All of these systems tilted the balance sharply toward the state and away from society. In all of them, government gained power at the expense of the people, with the leaders seeking to impose a philosophy of life that subordinated the individual to the needs of the community as defined by the state. The inner affinities of the New Deal with the continental dictatorships is well illustrated by a program that was one of FDR's favorites, the Civilian Conservation Corps. One of the first measures passed during FDR's first 100 days was the act establishing the Civilian Conservation Corps. Young men were enrolled as amateur forest rangers, marsh drainers, and the like on projects designed to improve the countryside. The recruits were given room and board, clothing, and $1 a day. More than 2.5 million of them passed through the camps of the Civilian Conservation Corps until the program was abolished in 1942, when the men were needed for the draft. In 1973, John A. Garrity published an important article on the CCC in the American Historical Review. Garrity was Governor Morris Professor of American History at Columbia and later general editor of the American National Biography, a distinguished historian and a pillar of the historical establishment. By no stretch of the imagination could he be considered one of the wretched band of Roosevelt haters. Yet, while a warm admirer of FDR, Garrity was compelled to note the striking similarities between the CCC and parallel programs set up by the Nazis for German youth. Both were essentially designed to keep young men out of the labor market. Roosevelt described work camps as means for getting youth off the city street corners, Hitler as a way of keeping them from rotting helplessly in the streets. In both countries, much was made of the beneficial social results of mixing thousands of young people from different walks of life into camps. Furthermore, both were organized on semi-military lines with the subsidiary purposes of improving the physical fitness of potential soldiers and stimulating public commitment to national service in an emergency. Garrity listed many other similarities between the New Deal and National Socialism. Like Roosevelt, Hitler prided himself on being a pragmatist in economic affairs, trying out one panacea after another. Through a multitude of new agencies and mountains of new regulations, both in Germany and America, owners and managers of enterprises found their freedom to make decisions sharply curtailed. The Nazis encouraged working-class mobility through vocational training, the democratizing youth camps, and a myriad of youth organizations. They usually favored workers as against employers in industrial disputes and, in another parallel to the New Deal, supported higher agricultural prices. Both FDR and Hitler tended to romanticize rural life and the virtues of an agricultural existence, and harbored dreams of the rural resettlement of urban populations, which proved disappointing. Characteristically, for the collectivist movements of the time, quote, enormous propaganda campaigns were mounted in the United States, Germany, and Italy as well as, of course, in Russia, to fire up enthusiasm for the government's programs. It is no wonder then that, as Professor Garrity writes, that, quote, during the first years of the New Deal, the German press praised him, Roosevelt, and the New Deal to the skies. Early New Deal policies seemed to the Nazis essentially like their own, and the role of Roosevelt not very different from the Führer's. America under FDR did not, of course, follow Germany and Russia on that fateful road to the bitter end. The main reason for this lies, as scholars such as Seymour Martin Lipset and Aaron L. Friedberg have recently written, in our deeply rooted individualist and anti-statist tradition, dating back to colonial and revolutionary times and never extinguished. Try as he might, Franklin Roosevelt could bend the American system only so far. This article was originally published by the Future of Freedom Foundation, February 1st, 2001. Isn't that remarkable? This article was published before 9/11. Then, of course, the tremendous impact of 9/11 upon our government, that is with the Patriot Act and the tightening. I mean, it's almost like the whole system described here in this very, very well written essay is happening right now in spades in front of our faces, and yet the election has given us a renewed belief in that rugged individualism that we still claim to be the American character. And I love the American character, and I want it preserved, and I want it preserved under the Constitution of the United States. And Rexford Tugwell and his absurd ideas have got to be relegated to the dustbins of history, if I can steal that phrase from someone. Well, anyway, that's all the article. I've skipped just a few paragraphs of it, read most of it, just taking the liberty to do so under the exception to the copyrights for educational purposes. And that is, of course, I think what Mises Institute is publishing these articles for in the first place. Well, let's go back and look at the comments. I have a few moments to do that. Laura Willingham, good morning. Mag McD, hi John. Do you have any information on McIntyre? No, I don't. Thank you. I didn't follow down that rabbit hole yet. I've got so many of these interesting questions that I haven't had a chance to get to. Interesting appointments thus far by Trump. Tulsi as DNI. Yeah, that is so interesting. You know, with her military background, she's all of this is going to be like a limited hangout book. Okay, the people that are going to be leading the charge are going to also be well aware that there's certain territory that they can't lead us into. And I think Tulsi is one of them. But on the other hand, she's young, dynamic, and to be able to knock heads with, John Brennan and, all the creeps that we've had to deal with in our lifetime. It's pretty exciting. I'm very discouraged about the appointments of the pro-Israel lobby, the Sheldon Adelson crew. And also I'll make a comment about Huckabee, because please go back and watch my Mindfields of about maybe a month ago on the Schofield Bible. Because if you just study that for just watch the 1 hour that I did on it, you'll be pretty convinced that the Schofield version of the Bible has been flooded into America for over 100 years by the British, who printed it at Oxford University Press with all of these Schofield comments that lead a person to believe that America, that all Christians have to support Israel or else they will go to hell. And that is just commentary that has been pushed into people's minds through publishing all of these millions and millions of Schofield Bibles. And it all goes back to British intelligence. So if we can somehow pull the cover off of that, then people like Huckabee won't be so powerful, because he's going to be a Zionist, a Christian Zionist leader. And as long as our broad Protestant Christian community believes in that Schofield version of the Bible, then our government is going to give Israel's complete carte blanche to do whatever they need to do to, finish the job, as President Trump called it. So I'm pretty disgusted with that. But on the other hand, I am sure that I do believe that our nation and the world dodged a bullet when we defeated Vice President Harris. Yes, David is such a wonderful source for all the numerous connections. And on my McDuff TV, if you go to McDuffLives.com and scroll down to the TV thing, I have a whole channel of David and me conversations, and it's really fun and interesting to just start listening wherever they are playing right now. They play 24/7 on McDuffLives.com. You have to know that this is kind of like a TV guide channel thing. The first channel you see is is only one of, I think, 8 channels that I have right now. And so if you go to that little blue box in the lower left, you'll see you can scroll down and watch the other channels. And I think you'll find a lot of interesting material if you haven't explored it yet. And that, again, is called McDuff TV, and it is playing on McDuffLives.com. Okay, here's some good stuff from David. I am tardy for the class. Tugwell Mueller Specialty Metals, and that Mueller, that's our great Robert Swan Mueller III's father. Robert Swan Mueller II was in partnership with Rexford Guy Tugwell Specialty Metals in Princeton, New Jersey, across the street from Bruce Ivans' anthrax mailbox. Telling you, David can tie it all together. Here we go. Tugwell came from Englehart Metals and was most likely influential to Mark Rich and Pincus Green at Phillips Brothers, which was an Englehart division. And that, of course, that's explored very well by our friend Mark Kulak, looking into the Phillips Brothers. Of course, also David has done the same. Let's keep going. Brightmore says 1932, technocracy movement formed at Columbia. This is real stuff, guys. And look at what we're doing now. We're putting satellites up in the sky that can look at us like a prison camp and probably do weird things to our brains if we misbehave. Why are we doing this? Why? All right, David, I'm just going to leave this one here. I have no clue what you're talking about, but Jesse Sweet Adolf Godfather Jones is innocent and shouldn't be persecuted in the Root and Brown Tower. Okay. X-Ray Girl. Yeah, hey, well, I guess that's because I got booted off of YouTube so many times, and best thing to do is to please sign up for my Rumble channel, McDuff Lives, all one word. You'll find it easily, and there's a follow button. Push the follow button, and you are in, because that's our main flagship channel right now, Rumble. I just don't trust YouTube, so that's why you haven't seen much of me there. Again, I'm doing it today to broadcast the fact that you please sign up for the Rumble channel. Key Jason, how you been? The joke was that the Russians knew domestic news were lies, but the West's crimes were real. Yeah. Will Trump pardon the J6 probe? He damn well better, huh? Are you kidding me? Laura, so gracious. Thank you, dear. Yeah, I do hope that people's minds get a little blown from time to time as we venture into these different corners of our collective history and try to make sense of it from a new and different perspectives. I think, I was referring Adam Finnegan, our friend who wrote The Sleeper Agent, to the book Rulers of Evil by Tupper Saucy, which is one of the first books I read on the show. And I think you can find that on McDuff TV as well. That is a real mind blowing book about and to the extent that you accept it, it's a narrative that I think is really, really fascinating about the Jesuits, who he refers to as the rulers of evil. Fascinating stuff to think of the world from through the eyes of Tupper Saucy's narrative. So that's just one of the many examples of we're way outside the box here at McDuff Lives, and that's what we have to do to get the perspective we need to really focus in on all the facets of our story and know as best we can where we came from, where we are, and hopefully heading someplace better than where we're at right now. Love Cat, how you been? Good morning. I'm just enjoying the glow of Tom Massey for Secretary of Ag and Joel Salatin as one of 6 advisors. Yes, fantastic news. Fantastic. That's the idea of real farmstead based living is so American, so attractive. And all of this corporate farming crap is so un-American and so totalitarian that it's obvious, except for the greed and the money and um, however those politicians get controlled. The need a clean house. We absolutely need to clean house everywhere. And the American people are saying that. It's like I was saying in the essay, the American cult, the character of America is still independent, liberty, freedom, self-sufficiency, as well as being a good neighbor. And the golden rule, which I say over and over again, is the essence of civil society and something we have got to pay a lot more attention to in our government and in our foreign policy and how we treat minorities and how we treat each other. Uh, Try to get away from identity politics and just deal with human politics. Trump is in all honesty, a Zionist leader, says Prester John. I'm afraid that you're probably right. Nobody knows what's in his heart. He can he has lots of layers. The 5D chess thing. Candace Owens had Kevin Ship on. Oh, thank you, love cat. Well, I'd be glad to appear on Candace's show. Thanks. Laura, that's brilliant. Yeah, you compared the Schofield to the other Bibles, and you could see the difference. And I think the main difference is the politicizing from British Zionism, British Israelism, the whole foreign policy of Britain in using Zionism to advance British elite financial interests. That's what I think is still going on in the world. I don't think that David Ben Gurion suddenly created a independent sovereign nation. I don't believe it. All right. The hour is about up, so I will just say thanks to everyone, and I'm sure enjoy chatting with you when we get a chance. And guess what? Tomorrow, Marcia will be with us, and she is looking forward to hearing from you guys. And we'll have a great conversation as we usually do at McDuff's live chat on Fridays at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. So join us then and have a great rest of the day.